Today's lesson is Finders Keepers, a brief history of English. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
My name is Kiki.
And we're talking about the history of English in today's lesson. And we're also talking about the fact that English has borrowed a lot of words from other languages. We did begin our last lesson with a quote there, which said that English has chased other languages down alleyways and rifled their pockets looking for new vocabulary. And, of course, indeed, English has borrowed a lot of words from other languages. What examples did we learn about last time, Kiki?
Well, we know that a lot of words are heavily influenced by Germanic languages, and most of these languages were brought over by Anglo-Saxons, which are people that were from the mainland Europe, and they came over to England. And these people, they brought a lot of different languages, German, Dutch, Scandinavian languages, and that's how we have Anglo-Saxons. And these languages and these words are still active in our modern-day English.
Exactly. So we talked about the Germanic influence, and we also talked about the Latin influence, especially some Latin words that came into English from Christian monks and missionaries, and they gave us words like candle and mass and perhaps other words as well. So today we're going to talk some more about the history of English and where it came up with all those words that you have to memorize for your TOEFL tests. Let's listen to the first part of our lesson now, and we'll be right back to discuss it.
The next influx of foreign words occurred when the Vikings invaded Britain in the 8th and 9th centuries. These new arrivals brought with them words starting with the sk sound, including sky and skill, and the personal pronouns they, their, and them. Moreover, the introduction of Norse words resulted in synonyms. For example, the Anglo-Saxon words sick and hide had Norse equivalents in ill and skin.
大家好，第一部分我们可以看到单字 equivalent， 它是名词，意思是相等物或是等值物。例如 In my opinion, this film has no equivalent. It's the best movie ever made. 依我看来，这部电影无可比拟，这是有史以来拍的最棒的一部片。或者 Spending a year in a country learning its native language can be the equivalent of taking classes for many years. 在一个国家花1年时间学习当地语言，等同于上好几年的语言课。另外，这个字也可以是形容词，意思是等值的或是相等的。例如 The hamburger that Brian had for lunch was equivalent to 500 calories. Brian 午餐吃的汉堡等同于500卡路里。又或者说 Tony's year-end bonus is equivalent to 2 months' salary. Tony 的年终奖金相当于2个月薪水。
Okay, so we're talking about the history of the English language. So we've talked about the Germanic languages, the Anglo-Saxons, and then we talked about Latin. Now we're talking about the Vikings, okay, which came from Scandinavia. And the next influx of foreign words occurred when the Vikings invaded Britain in the 8th and 9th centuries. Now, an influx here just means when something moves from another place inside of something else, and you can have an influx of, say, refugees from a war-torn area, like during the Syrian civil war there was an influx of refugees trying to get into Europe.
Right, and usually influx comes in large numbers, right?
It does indeed. And you could also talk about a large amount of water moving from some place to another. There was a great influx of water from the river during the flood or during the typhoon. So we've got this kind of flood of foreign words, and that occurred when the Vikings invaded Britain way back in the 8th and 9th centuries. The Vikings were those people who had the helmets with the horns, although people say, nah, they didn't really have those horns. That was added later, but that's kind of the image we have of the Vikings.
And with these new arrivals, they brought a lot of different words, starting with SK, the SK sound, which include words like sky and skill, and the personal pronouns they, there, and them. So when the Vikings arrived, they brought words that started with SK. So these were probably words that the Anglo-Saxons or people that lived in England at that time, they haven't seen words like this yet. They probably don't even have the sk sound yet. And when the Vikings came, that's when they started to use this type of spelling and these type of words.
Right, that's the sk sound. It could also include words that are spelled S-C-U-M, like scum, for example. And, of course, this refers to the sound, like sky and skill. And then we've got the personal pronouns that we all love so much, they, their, and them. And, of course, you have to know when to say them. They are coming over to their house to be with them. Now, moreover, the introduction of Norse words resulted in synonyms. Okay, a synonym is a word that means the same as another word, and English is full of them. Chinese has them as well. For example, go and quan in Chinese are synonyms. They're different words, but they mean the same thing.
And, for example, the Anglo-Saxon words sick and hide had Norse equivalents in ill and skin. So in this case, when you're sick, you can also be ill. You feel ill or you have an illness. So that's a synonym. And hide, you're not hiding from someone. This is actually an animal's skin, an animal's leather hide. Okay, so another way to say hide is skin.
Exactly. So we've got two synonyms there, and they mean the same thing, hide and skin, and also sick and ill. I'm ill today, I'm sick today. You could say it either way, although sick is probably more common, but in writing, it's sometimes pretty good. It's nice to have different words to express different things so that you don't get repetitive in your writing. So you like to have lots of synonyms there. And yes, indeed, we've got the word Norse here, which does refer to Norway and that part of Europe, and that, of course, is also referring to the Vikings. So an equivalent, of course, means the same thing, but in a different form. So when I went to university, for example, if you wanted to take a special course, they might ask for a prerequisite, a course that you should have taken before you take this particular course, or they say, a Math 101 is required, or an equivalent, a class that is similar or almost the same as another thing. Well, now it's time to move on to the second part of our lesson. Let's listen first, and then we'll come back to talk about it.
More profound, however, was the influence of French during the period of Middle English. When William the Conqueror, King of Normandy in western France, defeated the English in 1066, French became the language spoken by the ruling and upper classes. As a result, many English words regarding government, religion, law, art, and medicine come from French. Today, almost 1/3 of English words are of French origin.
第二部分我们看到形容词 profound， 意思是强烈的、巨大的、深刻的或是深奥的。举例来说， There was a profound feeling of sadness among attendees at the funeral. 参加丧礼的人都感到悲痛不已。又或者说， Oliver's childhood in Africa had a profound effect on his view of the world. Oliver 在非洲度过的童年对他的世界观有深远的影响。再来，我们看到单字 regarding， 它是介系词，指的是关于或是至于。例如， I sent you an email regarding the details of Friday's meeting. 我寄了一封关于周五会议细节的电子邮件给你。或是 Regarding next week's dinner party, what should we serve? 关于下周的晚宴，我们该上什么菜呢？
Okay, so far we've talked about the influence of the Anglo-Saxons and Germanic tribes and the Vikings and Christian missionaries who spoke Latin. Now let's talk about the influence of French during the period of Middle English. And this is a profound influence. If something's profound, it's deep and significant. Someone might say something that seems to be really significant and something you might want to think about. You might say, ooh, what you just said is very profound. That's very deep deep in meaning, we have to think about that for a long time.
Right. And profound could also mean something really important to somebody. So you might have said something that really means something to somebody, and they would really take it to heart, and it's really important to them what you said.
Exactly. So let's talk about this little aspect of English history, the history of the English language. We've got William the Conqueror. Okay, when William the Conqueror, king of Normandy in western France, defeated the English in 1066, French became the language spoken by the ruling and upper classes. So we've got this leader called William the Conqueror. A conqueror, of course, is someone who conquers somebody else. This is often used to refer to countries invading other countries and then controlling those countries as if they were their own territory. And in this particular case, the French, or the Normans, I should say more specifically, conquered England way back in 1066.
And that's when the French language became predominantly spoken by the ruling and upper classes. So at this point, if you were rich, or if you were of the upper class, or if you had a status in the government, you would speak French. So maybe the poor people at that time, they wouldn't speak French because they probably didn't get a chance to learn French. But because William the Conqueror had taken over, the people that were running the government, they were the ones that were speaking French. And that's when French language came into the area.
Exactly. So, of course, nowadays it's pretty cool if you can speak some French. You sound really cool. You sound really cultured, that you really know what you're doing. And I suppose it was the same back then because French was the language spoken by the rulers, by the leaders, by the kings and the queens and the princes and the princesses, and also the rich people, the upper classes. They were speaking French as well. I think there was a period of history in Russia that went through that as well. They thought speaking Russian was kind of low class, and they all tried to learn French, at least for a while. But in any case, as a result, many English words regarding government, religion, law, art, and medicine come from French. So indeed, we do have lots of English words that have to do with government, that have to do with religion, that have to do with law, art, and medicine. Well, most of them all come from French. And here we've got the verb to regard, which means they have to do with these things. They're in reference to government, religion, law, etc.
Right. And an example of a word in English that sounds like French is medicine itself. In French, it's médecin. So it's really interesting to see that we have so many words that are related to all of these different areas like government, religion, and law. These all have persisted and stayed in our language use today.
Indeed, and I should give an example here for regarding. We often see this word used in business correspondence. If somebody writes you a letter and when you reply, you could say, well, regarding your last email, or in reference to your last email, I'd like to say this. So yes, indeed, these words do have to do with government, religion, medicine, etc., etc. And today, almost 1/3 of English words are of French origin, which is kind of surprising because I thought the English and the French hated each other. You might think the English would say, nope, we're not going to speak any French words. It's bad enough being separated from them by the English Channel. We're not going to learn any French, but hey, there's a lot of words in French that found their way into the English language, and I bet a lot of native English speakers don't even know that the words they're using come from French or Latin or Anglo-Saxon or whatever.
And they just think, oh, that's English. Well, that's the end of part 2. Let's have a listen at part 3.
The Renaissance in the 1500s and the Scientific Revolution in the 19th century both contributed substantially to English too. The former brought about interest in classical literature, which added many Latin and some Greek words, such as democracy, and the latter introduced a wave of scientific terms derived from the same languages, such as aquarium and binoculars. English may borrow fewer words these days, but there's no denying its long history of rifling through the pockets of other languages.
第三部分我们看到副词 substantially， 意思是在很大程度上、巨大的或是大体上。举例来说 The report that Lisa submitted turned out to be substantially longer than what she had expected. Lisa 缴交的报告比她预想中的要长很多。又或者是 Eric has substantially more wealth than I do, but he isn't happier than me. Eric 拥有的财富比我多得多，但他没有比我更快乐。另外，去掉这个字的字尾 ly， 就会变成形容词 substantial， 表示可观的或是大量的。例如 Rob won a substantial amount of money from the lottery. Rob 在彩券上赢了很多钱。又或者是 Monica inherited a substantial amount of property after her grandmother passed away. Monica 的奶奶过世后，她继承了为数可观的土地。最后我们看到单字 literature， 它是名词，意思是文学或是文学作品。像是 Mark Twain produced numerous classic works of American literature. Mark Twain 创作了美国文学中许多经典作品。也可以说 While they're not considered great literature, romance novels are my favorite. 虽然爱情小说不被认为是伟大的文学作品，但却是我的最爱。最后一个例子 Leslie's favorite class in college is English literature. Leslie 大学时最喜欢的课程是英国文学课。
Okay, here's the third part, and we're moving on into the Renaissance period, which is kind of a rebirth in the arts and culture and things like that. And it occurred in the 1500s, give or take a couple of hundred years. I should mention that Renaissance is the American pronunciation. I think in England they say Renaissance. But we're talking about a period of history referred to as the Renaissance of the 1500s. And then we've got the scientific revolution in the 19th century. And both of those periods of history contributed substantially to English as well, to English too, okay? So the Renaissance, of course, I guess that happened mostly in Italy and France. So, of course, we got influence from those areas of Europe. And then we've got the scientific revolution in the 19th century. They, of course, contributed lots of words to the English language as well. To contribute just means to give something to someone else. You can make a contribution, for example, to a charity. That would be the noun, but again, contribute is the verb. And substantially just means to a very large degree.
Right, and just to add to the Renaissance or the Renaissance is actually the French word for rebirth or just something changing. To renaître is to be reborn. So the Renaissance was really when the arts, it was a period when the art revolution, there was a rebirth of revolution.
Indeed, so that again is a period of history that influenced English, as did the scientific revolution in the 1800s. And the former brought about interest in classical literature, which added many Latin and some Greek words, such as democracy. And the latter introduced a wave of scientific terms derived from the same languages, such as aquarium and binoculars. Okay, so we're referring to these two periods of history. And we're saying that the former, which would be the Renaissance, the one we mentioned first, that brought about interest in classical literature. To bring about just means to make something happen. Literature, of course, is the written word in books, stories, novels, poetry, etc. So they added lots of Latin and Greek words, for example, democracy. And then the latter, which was the scientific revolution in the 19th century, that was responsible for scientific terms, would be aquarium, where you put your fish, and binoculars, which you use to go bird watching.
English may borrow fewer words these days, but there's no denying its long history of rifling through the pockets of other languages. Okay, so even though modern-day English, we're not borrowing as many words from different languages anymore because English is a really old language now. So it's come to its own terms now, okay? But we can't deny that it's had a long history of going through other languages. We mentioned rifling through, so you're really going through or searching through these different languages and trying to take words from them.
Exactly, and of course we also got this pattern, may do something, but this is still true. So I could say, well, you may be smarter than me, but I can still run much faster than you. And so we're saying English may borrow fewer words these days, but still, we cannot deny that English has borrowed a lot of words from other languages and maybe even claimed them as their own. And maybe they might laugh at other countries when they say, hey, that word actually comes from French. It does not. It's English through and through. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Let's hear from Hanny now.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分有一句提到，古斯堪的纳维亚语词汇的引进导致了同义词的产生。那文中它用到 synonym 这个名词来表达同义词，它的相反词则是 antonym 来表达反义词。我们来补充一下它们的字首字根。好，看到 O-N-Y-M 这个字根表示字或是名字。那么在 synonym 这个字当中，它的字首 S-Y-N 可以表达同时一起或是相同的意思。那在这边是指相同。那么 O-N-Y-M 这个字根表示字或名，合在一起 synonym 就可以表达同义字词。再来看到 antonym， 它的字首 A-N-T 其实是 A-N-T-I 的变形。那么 A-N-T-I 它有相反的或是反对对抗的意思。接着我们在后面加上 O-N-Y-M 这个字根变成 antonym， 那就表示反义字词了。另外补充两个有相同字根的单字，第一个是 acronym A-C-R-O-N-Y-M。好，那它的字首 ACRO 带有这个高点最高或是顶端尖端的意思，然后再搭配这个字根 ONYM， 那就会变成 acronym 来表达首字母缩写词、首字母组合词。同学们可以去想象说，首字母缩写词就是由每个单字最前端的字母所组成的，所以你可以从它这个字根字首去想象它这个中文的意思。好，再看到第二个补充的是 anonymous， 它的字首 AN 是指 without， 就是无没有，然后字根 ONYM 表示字或是名字。先把这两部分组合在一起 anonym 就是名词来表达无名氏或者是假名。那么后面再加上形容词字尾 OUS 会得到 anonymous， 那就可以形容是匿名的、不知姓名的。接着读到课文最后一句，他说现今英语可能借用的词汇变少了，但不可否认的是，它有一段翻寻其他语言口袋的悠久历史。好，文中是用到 there is no denying 来表达不可否认的、毋庸置疑的，后面可以接名词或是接 that 子句，像 there is no denying that chocolate is popular all over the world。不可否认的是，巧克力在世界各地都很受欢迎。好，那其实 there is no denying 的用法呢，是来自 there is no 加上动词 ing 的形式。好，那这样的句型是表达说点点点是不可能的，意思就跟 it is impossible to do something 这样的差不多。我们来补充两个这种句型。第一个是 there is no telling， 是表达无从得知点点点，后面常常接 which 疑问词或者是 if 引导的名词子句，像 there's no telling how she will react to the news， 不知道她对这个消息会有什么反应。好，在第二个补充的是 there's no stopping somebody， 或者是 there's no holding somebody， 是指说阻止不了某人，挡也挡不住某人。像 once she starts talking about her children, there's no stopping her。 她一旦开始聊起她的小孩，就没完没了，也没办法阻止她。好，那以上今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Synonym. Wonderful is one of the many synonyms for excellent. Equivalent. At the current exchange rate, $1 US is the equivalent of 31 new Taiwan dollars. Profound. Jane felt profound sadness over the death of the puppy. Regarding. Mrs. Withers spoke to Emmett regarding his poor test scores. Substantially. The baseball team will be substantially different due to the loss of several players. Literature. Professor Yamada is an expert in Japanese literature.
Discussion starter starts now!
It's time for our discussion starter. The question is, what were you most surprised to learn from the article about the non-English sources of some English words and why?
Well, I was really surprised about the Vikings' influence on English because I didn't know that. Just like I didn't know that the sk sound came from the Vikings, like sky or skill. You know, like I didn't know that these derived from the Vikings and that they actually contributed to English because you feel like there's such a different culture from the English culture. And that before they came, I didn't know they didn't have personal pronouns such as they, them, or there.
Well, I was most surprised to learn that we didn't mention the Spanish influence on English, at least for the United States, because Mexico is a Spanish-speaking country, so a lot of Spanish words have found their way into the English language. I'm kind of surprised the article did not deal with that so much, but I guess they don't have that influence in England so much. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I am Kiki.
See you next time.